The slippery slope of justice. The champagne flute arced through the air, catching the late afternoon sun as Linda's high heels skidded on the unseen layer of slick gel coating my patio tiles. Her arms windmilled, a desperate attempt to stay upright, while a groomsman lunged for the teetering wedding cake, only to slide into the flower girl, who barreled into the gift table with a crash that echoed across the backyard. Guests gasped, the bride wailed, and someone in the crowd hollered, "Is this a wedding or a slapstick comedy?" I stood at the edge of my own patio, arms folded, watching the chaos unfold with a calm satisfaction. Just days earlier, Linda, the HOA's self-appointed queen, had smugly informed me I should feel privileged that my private space was being borrowed for her niece's wedding. Borrowed without consent, mind you. Now, as the scene unraveled, justice felt as smooth and slippery as the tiles beneath their feet. It all began on a quiet Thursday morning in our suburban enclave of Willow Creek, a tidy neighborhood in suburban Virginia where picket fences and manicured lawns were the law of the land. I was 58, retired from a career in architectural engineering, and savoring the simple pleasure of my morning coffee while watching the neighborhood cats stalk a squirrel in my backyard. The tranquility was shattered by a sharp knock at my door. Taped to it was a glossy flyer from the Willow Creek HOA, the kind of thing I usually ignored: waterline maintenance, community picnic updates, the usual. But at the bottom, in a garish font, was a note about community event overflow being accommodated on shared spaces. I shrugged, tossed it on the kitchen counter, and went about my day. Little did I know, that flyer was the opening salvo in a battle I never asked for. By Friday afternoon, the situation escalated. I pulled into my driveway after a quick trip to the hardware store and froze. Two men in matching polo shirts were wheeling a portable dance floor onto my patio, the one attached to my living room through sliding glass doors, the one I'd spent years perfecting with Italian ceramic tiles. They were stringing up fairy lights and setting up folding chairs like my backyard was a public park. I stepped out, incredulous, and asked what was going on. The skinnier of the two, clutching a clipboard, barely looked up. "This is the spot for the Thompson wedding," he said, as if I should have known. The Thompson wedding? Linda Thompson's niece. I told him, as politely as I could muster, that this was private property. He double-checked his work order, shrugged, and suggested I take it up with the client. That's when she appeared, Linda, in all her glory, striding across my lawn like she owned it. Oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, a blazer with shoulder pads sharp enough to cut glass, and a voice that could shatter crystal. She informed me, with a smirk that could curdle milk, that my patio was being used for a very special occasion. When I pointed out it was my private property, she waved a manicured hand and cited some obscure HOA bylaw section 3B. She claimed that designated my patio as part of the community viewing deck. I wasn't buying it. I pulled out my purchase agreement, the deed with the property map clearly outlining my lot, and showed it to her. Linda rolled her eyes, dismissing me like I was a pesky intern. "This is for my niece, Sarah," she said, as if that justified everything. 70 guests, a beautiful contribution to the community spirit. You should be honored. Honored? That was the moment something in me snapped, not loudly, not angrily, but with a cold, calculating clarity. Linda had crossed a line, mistaking my restraint for weakness. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just smiled a tight, dangerous smile and told her she had 24 hours to clear my property. She laughed, turned on her heel, and hummed a wedding tune as she sauntered off. That night, I pored over my HOA contract, every clause, every footnote. The patio was mine, exclusive use, no ambiguity. I called a lawyer friend, Mark, who confirmed Linda was bluffing. She had no authority to commandeer my space, and the flyer was likely a forgery. He advised documenting everything, but warned that going through the HOA board might be too slow. The wedding was in less than 36 hours. As I hung up, I saw Linda outside, directing a crew setting up floral arches and a DJ booth, sipping a Starbucks like she was overseeing a royal gala. That's when I knew words wouldn't stop her. She was too entrenched in her own delusion of power. But I could make her regret it. I wasn't always this calculating. Years in architectural safety systems, testing surface friction for buildings and public spaces, had taught me patience and precision. I knew materials, how they reacted, how they could be manipulated. And I knew something Linda didn't. What happens when a soap-based gel, used in industrial cooling systems, is applied to polished tiles. It's odorless, non-toxic, and turns a smooth surface into a skating rink. I didn't want anyone hurt, just humbled. I wanted a spectacle, something that would linger in Willow Creek's collective memory. So, I drove to a supply shop where an old colleague hooked me up with the compound. That night, under cover of darkness, I crept onto my patio like a covert operative, spreading a thin layer of gel across the high-traffic areas: the dance floor, the buffet line, the path to the DJ booth. I avoided the entry rugs to delay the chaos until the party was in full swing. By midnight, the patio gleamed innocently under the moonlight, and I'd erased all evidence of my work. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and crisp, the kind of Virginia day that makes you forget the humidity of summer. From my kitchen window, I watched Willow Creek come alive with the buzz of anticipation. Guests in pastel dresses and tailored suits trickled into my backyard, oblivious to the fact they were trespassing on my private patio. Linda, dressed in a lavender silk robe and curlers, strutted around like a director on a Hollywood set, barking orders at the catering crew and adjusting floral arrangements with the precision of a general. She didn't glance my way, not once. She must have thought I'd caved, that her dismissal of my objections had silenced me. But silence, I've learned, can be louder than any argument. I stayed inside, sipping my coffee, the deed to my property laid out on the counter like a battle plan. I'd spent the previous evening not just applying the gel, but documenting everything. I'd taken time-stamped photos of the setup, recorded video of the crew transforming my patio into a wedding venue, even enlisted a friend with a drone to capture aerial shots of the invasion. Every piece of evidence was cataloged in a digital folder, a fortress of proof that Linda's community viewing deck was a fiction. I wasn't just preparing for a prank. I was building a case. Linda's arrogance had blinded her to one critical fact. I wasn't the pushover she assumed. As the morning wore on, the patio transformed. White tints bloomed like oversized mushrooms, gold-trimmed chairs lined up in neat rows, and a massive speaker system squatted ominously near my sliding glass doors. It looked like a budget version of a country club wedding, complete with an LED-lit DJ booth that screamed overkill. I overheard Linda boasting to a gaggle of relatives, her voice carrying through the open window. I pulled some strings to secure this spot. It's the best view in Willow Creek. A woman in a floral hat patted her arm, cooing, "You're always the fixer, Linda." The fixer. That phrase stuck with me, fueling the fire that had been smoldering since her "you should be honored" comment. I tested the gel's effectiveness one last time in my garage, spreading a small patch on a spare tile. It was like stepping on ice, perfectly treacherous. I'd chosen the compound carefully, a non-toxic formula used in warehouses to reduce friction on heavy equipment. Years ago, during a lab test, a colleague had spilled a bucket of it on a tiled floor, and the cleaning crew had to crawl out on their hands and knees to avoid falling. That memory was the spark, the moment I knew I could turn Linda's triumph into a lesson she'd never forget. My goal wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was controlled chaos, a spectacle that would expose her entitlement without causing real harm. By noon, the guests were arriving in droves, their cars clogging the cul-de-sac. I watched from behind my blinds, noting the bride, Sarah, in her flowing white gown, radiant but nervous. The groom, a lanky guy named Tom, looked like he was already regretting the guest list. Linda handed out wedding programs with her name listed as host, as if she owned my property. I stayed calm, my phone ready to record the inevitable. The ceremony began, and I noted with satisfaction that the aisle and altar area left untreated were safe. No one slipped during the vows. Rings were exchanged, applause rippled through the crowd, and Linda beamed like she'd just won an Oscar for community service. But the real show was coming. As the officiant wrapped up, the DJ cranked up a cheesy instrumental version of a pop song, signaling the start of the reception. Guests milled about, grabbing appetizers and posing for photos. A photographer's drone buzzed overhead, capturing what I knew would be high-definition footage of the chaos to come. Linda, now in a glittering navy dress, laughed louder than anyone, her voice cutting through the chatter as she declared, "This is why I always take charge. If you want something done right, do it yourself." I smirked from inside. "Oh, Linda, you have no idea." The first dance was announced, and Sarah and Tom took to the center of the patio, the ground zero of my plan. The DJ spun a slow, romantic tune, and the couple twirled, their movements tentative at first. Then it happened. Sarah's heel caught the gel, her foot sliding out from under her. She gasped, clutching Tom, who tried to steady her but lost his balance, toppling backward with her landing on his chest. The crowd laughed, thinking it was a cute stumble. But then the best man stepped forward to help, only to execute a full-body slide into the buffet table, sending shrimp cocktails flying. Gasps turned to shrieks, then to nervous laughter as more guests ventured onto the dance floor and met the same fate. It was like watching a comedy sketch unfold in slow motion. A woman in a pink dress slid under the dessert table, emerging with frosting in her hair. An older man used a chair as a makeshift walker, inching towards safety. The flower girl, in a panic, sprinted across the patio and launched herself into a decorative hedge. And proud Linda stepped forward to take control, only to have her heels betray her. She went down hard, crashing into a table of appetizers, her dress now smeared with guacamole and bits of deviled egg. The DJ, clearly rattled, tried to salvage the mood with an upbeat track, but it only encouraged more guests to join the unintentional slip and slide. I filmed it all from behind my glass doors, my phone capturing every glorious moment. Linda, red-faced and disheveled, finally noticed me. She staggered to her feet, pointed in my direction, and pounded on the door, shrieking accusations I couldn't quite hear over the chaos. I didn't open the door. Instead, I held up my copy of the HOA agreement, the property boundaries highlighted in bright yellow, and pressed it against the glass like a lawyer presenting Exhibit A. Her face contorted, a mix of fury and disbelief, as if she couldn't fathom being outmaneuvered. Guests started to disperse, some laughing, others calling for rides. One man in a soaked suit declaring, "This is the most memorable wedding I've ever been to." The aftermath was a battlefield of toppled chairs, soggy tablecloths, and dazed guests wiping frosting from their clothes. Sarah sat on a flipped-over chair, her dress ruined, tears streaking her makeup. Tom hovered nearby, looking like he wanted to bolt. Linda stood in the center of the wreckage, shaking with rage, her once perfect blowout now a nest of leaves and icing. She charged my door again, banging on the glass and accusing me of sabotage. I opened it just a crack, my voice steady as I reminded her she'd trespassed, forged documents, and ignored my warnings. "This chaos," I said, "is all yours." Then I closed the door in her face. Minutes later, 2 HOA enforcers, Dave and Ellen, appeared at my doorstep, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Linda loomed behind them, arms crossed, glaring daggers. Dave, the more diplomatic of the two, suggested I might have used something unusual on the patio. I handed him a copy of my deed, complete with a notary stamp, and explained I'd simply cleaned my own property. He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. Linda tried to grab the folder, but he pulled it away, clearly unsettled. That's when the game changed. An elderly guest, Mrs. Carter, stepped forward, her green floral dress pristine amidst the chaos. She announced she'd recorded everything, including Linda's boasts about forging the HOA flyer and putting that smug homeowner in his place. She played the video on her phone, Linda's voice ringing out, clear and damning. The enforcers' faces hardened. Dave apologized and left without another word. Linda stayed behind, hissing that this wasn't over. I smiled. "You're right," I said. "It's just beginning." The days following the wedding disaster were like the quiet after a hurricane, debris everywhere, but the air felt cleaner. My patio, now scrubbed clean of the gel and sealed with a fresh coat of polish, stood as a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded. Willow Creek buzzed with whispers, and my phone pinged with notifications from neighbors sharing grainy clips of the fiasco. One video, titled "The Great Wedding Wipeout," showed Linda sliding into the appetizer table, her face a mix of shock and guacamole. Another, dubbed "Thompson's Tumble," captured the bride and groom's ill-fated first dance. The comments sections were a battlefield. Some called me a hero, others a villain, but all agreed it was unforgettable. I stayed silent, letting the truth speak for itself. Linda, however, wasn't one to let things slide, pun intended. The morning after the wedding, I woke to a thick envelope shoved through my mail slot, addressed in ostentatious cursive. It was a legal notice from Linda's attorney, accusing me of defamation, property sabotage, and causing emotional distress to the bride, Sarah, who was allegedly in therapy over the trauma of the event. I nearly laughed at the absurdity, but I knew Linda was serious. She was trying to rewrite the narrative, painting herself as the victim and me as the neighborhood menace. But I prepared for this. Every photo, video, and document I'd collected was ready to counter her claims. I called Mark, my lawyer friend, who reviewed the notice and chuckled. "This is all bluster," he said. "She's got nothing, but we'll respond thoroughly and publicly." That afternoon, the HOA called an emergency meeting, and the tension in the community center was palpable. Neighbors packed the room, some curious, others furious. Linda arrived in a garish blazer, her usual swagger dialed up to 11 as she tried to play the wrong party. The board president, Margaret, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, opened the meeting by asking Linda to explain herself. Linda launched into a tearful monologue, claiming I'd sabotaged her niece's wedding out of spite, endangering lives and humiliating her family. She pointed at me, her voice quivering with rehearsed indignation. "This man," she said, "is a menace to our community." When it was my turn, I handed Margaret a flash drive with my evidence. Time-stamped photos, drone footage, the forged HOA flyer, and Mrs. Carter's damning video of Linda bragging about her scheme. The room went quiet as the clips played on the projector. Linda's voice echoed, "I don't care what the paperwork says. I make the decisions around here." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by a few gasps. Linda tried to claim the clips were out of context, but Mrs. Carter, who'd been invited to the meeting, stood up. "You can't take something out of context when you shouted it loud enough for the squirrels to hear," she said, drawing chuckles from the crowd. The board didn't hesitate. They voted unanimously to strip Linda of her HOA vice president role and suspend her voting rights. Margaret read a legal notice stating Linda would be personally liable for the wedding's damages cleanup, equipment repairs, even the ruined cake since she'd acted without authorization. Linda's face crumpled, her usual bravado replaced by stunned silence. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Margaret turned to me. "You handled this better than most," she said. I nodded and left, feeling the weight of the victory, but knowing Linda wasn't done. The internet, meanwhile, was having a field day. The wedding clips had gone viral, picked up by a local blog called Suburban Shenanigans. Their article, HOA Havoc, Wedding Crashed by Rogue Planner, included stills of Linda's slide into infamy and a neutral recounting of the story, with quotes from anonymous guests who confirmed my patio wasn't community property. The comments were a mix of outrage and amusement, with some decrying my methods as reckless and others hailing me as a folk hero. I didn't engage, but the attention brought an unexpected opportunity, an invite from a podcast called Neighborhood Nightmares. They wanted to share my story anonymously, of course. After some thought, I agreed. Not for fame, but to warn others about people like Linda. The podcast, The Slippery Truth Behind a Wedding Meltdown, dropped a week later and racked up 500,000 plays. Linda's legal team sent another notice, demanding I retract all public statements. I hadn't made any, but the podcast host stood firm, citing verified evidence and public footage. The pressure was backfiring. Neighbors started speaking out, emboldened by the public exposure. A former board member posted a thread about Linda's history of bending bylaws, issuing fines for fake violations, and funneling HOA funds to her pet projects like the time she upgraded her own front yard with community money. The thread exploded, with homeowners adding their own stories of Linda's tyranny. Then came a surprise visit. Sarah, the bride, showed up at my door, alone and visibly uncomfortable. Over coffee, she apologized, explaining she'd been told by Linda that the patio was community space and I'd agreed to host. "I should have asked questions," she said, her voice soft. It all happened so fast. I could tell she was genuine, a victim of Linda's manipulation. Then she dropped a bombshell. She and Tom had annulled their marriage. He'd vanished a week after the wedding, unable to handle the fallout. Sarah laughed wryly, saying the slip into the cake was the most honest moment of their relationship. She was starting a podcast about wedding disasters and asked if I'd join her first episode not as a villain, but as the twist that made her story unforgettable. I agreed, amused by the irony. The interview was surprisingly cathartic. Sarah shared her side. I shared mine. and we both laughed at how a single patio had upended so many lives. The episode, slipping into clarity, struck a chord with listeners who flooded the comments with their own tales of overbearing neighbors and HOA drama. Back in Willow Creek, the HOA board ordered a full audit of past spending, uncovering a dozen unauthorized expenses tied to Linda, everything from catered lunches for her planning sessions to a suspiciously timed sprinkler system upgrade outside her house. The community's anger shifted from me to her, uniting neighbors in a way I hadn't expected. But Linda wasn't gone. Her house went quiet. The lawn gnomes she loved so much vanished, and her motion-activated sprinkler, infamous for soaking unsuspecting dog walkers, sat dormant. I thought maybe the public humiliation had finally broken her. Then came the knock at my door. A man in an orange vest, clipboard in hand, claimed he was there to install community security cameras on my property, ordered by the HOA Vice President Linda Thompson. My patience didn't just wear thin, it evaporated. She was gone from the board, stripped of authority, yet here she was, still scheming. I called Margaret, who was livid. Linda had posed as an independent community consultant, forging documents to issue work orders. She'd tried the same trick on another neighbor, demanding a tree be trimmed for obstructing the view. This wasn't just HOA meddling, Anna Maria, it was fraud. I documented everything: the work order, the man's ID, the truck's license plate. Then I made a call to an old colleague in municipal fraud investigation. Linda had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her slink away. The discovery of Linda's latest scheme, posing as an independent community consultant to install cameras on my property, lit a fire under me. This wasn't just another HOA power grab. It was a calculated attempt to reassert control after her public humiliation. I stood in my living room, staring at the forged work order, the ink still fresh from some shady printer. Willow Creek had been through enough, and I wasn't about to let Linda drag us back into her drama. I called Margaret, the HOA president, who was already drafting a formal complaint to the city. "She's gone too far," Margaret said, her voice tight with anger. "This ends now." I agreed, but I knew ending Linda's reign would take more than words. It would take evidence, strategy, and a community fed up with her antics. I spent the morning documenting the incident with the precision of a detective. I photographed the work order, recorded a statement from the delivery guy who admitted he'd been misled by Linda's official HOA letterhead, and even snapped pictures of the truck's license plate. My folder of evidence, already bulging from the wedding fiasco, grew thicker. I called my old colleague, Susan, who worked in municipal fraud investigation. She listened as I laid out the timeline: the forged flyer, the wedding, the viral fallout, and now this fraudulent attempt to invade my property again. "This is textbook misrepresentation," Susan said. "If she's using HOA branding without authority, that's a legal line she can't uncross." She promised to escalate the case to the city's fraud division. While the legal gears turned, I decided to add a personal touch to my patio's legacy. It had become a neighborhood legend, dubbed the Slick Zone by local kids. I commissioned a small metal plaque, subtle but pointed, to be embedded near the back gate. It read, "The truth slips here, June 2025. No mention of Linda, no gloating, just a quiet nod to those in the know." The installer, a local craftsman, grinned when I explained its purpose. "You're a legend, man," he said, hammering it into place. Word spread fast. By evening, neighbors were stopping by to snap photos, some leaving post-it notes on my door with messages like, "Thanks for standing up to her, and you made HOA history." Linda's retaliation, however, was escalating. A week after the camera incident, I received another legal notice, this one thicker than the last. Her attorney now claimed I'd orchestrated a malicious campaign to defame her, citing the viral videos and the podcast episodes. The notice demanded I pay $50,000 in damages and issue a public apology. I handed it to Mark, who laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "She's grasping at straws," he said. "This is a scare tactic, nothing more." He drafted a response, attaching my evidence and a countersuit for trespassing, fraud, and emotional distress, ironic, given her claims. "Let's see how she likes playing defense," Mark said with a grin. The community, meanwhile, was rallying. The HOA audit had uncovered a treasure trove of Linda's misdeeds: unauthorized landscaping projects, fake fines issued to her rivals, even a $2,000 consulting fee she'd paid herself for community planning. At the next HOA meeting, attendance was standing room only. Margaret laid out the findings, her voice steady but sharp. Neighbors who'd once feared Linda's wrath now spoke openly, sharing stories of her bullying, how she'd fined one family for a mailbox that was too blue, or pressured another into removing a swing set because it clashed with the aesthetic. The room crackled with outrage, but it was a focused anger aimed at reform. Then came an unexpected ally. Sarah, the bride, reached out again, this time with a proposal. Her podcast, Wedding Wrecks, had taken off, and she wanted to dedicate an episode to exposing HOA abuses, using her aunt's actions as a case study. She asked if I'd share my evidence anonymously, of course. I hesitated. I wasn't after fame, and the legal battle with Linda was heating up. But Sarah's sincerity won me over. This isn't just about us, she said. It's about making sure no one else gets steamrolled. We recorded the episode, the HOA Horror Show, weaving together my story, her perspective, and clips from neighbors who'd suffered under Linda's rule. It was raw, funny, and damning, clocking over 1 million downloads in days. The podcast sparked a firestorm. Local news outlets picked up the story, and Suburban Shenanigans ran a follow-up piece. From wedding crash to HOA clash, the fall of a neighborhood tyrant. The comments sections exploded with debates. Some called my gel stunt unethical, arguing it endangered guests. Others saw it as justified, a creative stand against injustice. One commenter wrote, "This guy's a genius. He didn't throw a punch, threw a curveball." Another countered, "He could have hurt someone." There's a line between justice and revenge. The divide fascinated me. Was I a hero or a vigilante? Even I wasn't sure, but I knew I'd done what I had to. Linda's house remained eerily quiet, her signature lawn gnomes gone, her mailbox overflowing. Then, one night, the neighborhood kids delivered a final blow. Armed with biodegradable balloons and a borrowed projector, they staged a silent slideshow on Linda's garage wall, looping clips of her wedding slide, her cake-covered dress flapping in the breeze. A small crowd gathered, watching from lawn chairs, no one speaking. Linda stormed out, her face pale under the flickering images, and yanked the projector's plug. The kids scattered, leaving behind a single balloon with Queen of Slips scrawled on it. It was petty, sure, but it felt like poetic justice. The city's investigation was moving faster now. Susan called to say Linda faced potential charges for impersonating an official and misusing HOA funds. Several neighbors had filed complaints, citing her fake work orders and unauthorized property access. A court date was set, and the HOA issued a formal notice holding Linda liable for $15,000 in wedding damages. For someone who'd once threatened to sue me for everything I had, Linda was now drowning in her own consequences. But I wasn't celebrating yet. People like her don't go quietly, they regroup, they scheme, and they strike back. Then came the knock that changed everything. It was Sarah again, but this time she wasn't alone. Margaret and a dozen neighbors stood behind her, holding a stack of signed petitions. They wanted to reform the HOA, starting with term limits and transparent budgeting. "You showed us we can fight back," Sarah said. "We want you on the board." I was floored. I'd never wanted power, just peace. But their faces hopeful, determined, made me realize this wasn't about me anymore. It was about a community reclaiming its voice. I agreed to run, but only if we could host a movie night on my patio, with full permission and no slippery surprises. They laughed, and we sealed the deal with a handshake. The petition from Sarah, Margaret, and the neighbors marked a turning point for Willow Creek. It wasn't just about ousting Linda. It was about rebuilding a community that had been stifled by her reign. As I stood on my patio that evening, the infamous Slick Zone, now clean and gleaming under the stars, I felt a strange mix of pride and relief. The plaque I'd installed, "The Truth Slips Here, June 2025," caught the moonlight, a quiet reminder of the battle fought and won. But the war wasn't over. Linda's legal threats and fraudulent schemes hung like a storm cloud, and I knew the final chapter of this saga would demand every ounce of my resolve. The city's investigation into Linda's actions gained momentum. Susan, my contact in municipal fraud, called to confirm that Linda faced serious charges, impersonating a city official, forging HOA documents, and misusing community funds. The evidence was overwhelming me: folder of photos, videos, and work orders, combined with complaints from other neighbors who'd been targeted by her fake fines and tree trimming demands. The court date was set for mid-July, and the HOA's attorney sent Linda a bill for $15,000 to cover the wedding damages, plus an additional $5,000 for unauthorized use of HOA branding. For the first time, Linda's empire was crumbling, and she had no one to blame but herself. But Linda wasn't done fighting. A week after the petition, another envelope arrived, this one from a new attorney. It accused me of orchestrating a public smear campaign through the podcast and viral videos, demanding I cease all defamatory actions and pay $75,000 in damages. Mark, my lawyer, called it a desperate Hail Mary. He filed a motion to dismiss, attaching my evidence and a detailed timeline of Linda's actions. "She's trying to scare you into settling," he said. "But she's the one who's scared." He was right. The podcast, Wedding Wrecks, had exploded, with Sarah's episode featuring our story topping 2 million downloads. The Suburban Shenanigans blog ran a third piece, The Fall of Willow Creek's HOA Queen, and the comments were brutal. One reader wrote, "This woman thought she was untouchable. Props to the homeowner for showing her otherwise." Another argued, "The gel was too far, someone could have been hurt. There's got to be a better way to fight back." The debate fascinated me. Had I crossed a line? I'd been careful no one was seriously injured, and the gel was non-toxic. But the ethical gray area sparked heated discussions online and in Willow Creek. At the local coffee shop, neighbors split into camps. Some toasted me as a rebel hero, others whispered I'd gone rogue. I didn't care about the labels. I'd protected my property and exposed a bully. Still, the question lingered, was justice worth the chaos? I pushed it aside, focusing on the bigger picture, ensuring Linda's schemes ended for good. The HOA election was a whirlwind. I ran for a board seat, not out of ambition, but because the community needed a voice that wouldn't bow to intimidation. The campaign was simple. I promised transparency, fairness, and no more forged flyers. Neighbors rallied behind me, sharing stories of Linda's overreach to sway undecided voters. One woman recounted how Linda had fined her $200 for a non-compliant garden gnome, only to drop the fine when she threatened to sue. Another neighbor revealed Linda had tried to ban his dog for excessive barking based on a single complaint from her. The stories poured out, each one a brick in the wall of accountability we were building. Election night was electric. The community center was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Margaret announced the results. I'd won by a landslide, alongside 2 other reform candidates. The crowd cheered, and someone yelled, "No more slippery slopes," a nod to my patio's infamy. We immediately passed new bylaws, term limits for board members, public budget reports, and a process to challenge fines. For the first time, Willow Creek's HOA felt like it served the people, not a single tyrant. Linda's absence was conspicuous. Her house, once a hub of HOA patrols and self-important flag displays, was dark, curtains drawn. Then, one morning, a moving truck pulled up. Neighbors watched from their porches as Linda, in a floppy hat and sunglasses, oversaw the loading of her belongings. No one spoke to her. No one waved. She'd ruled Willow Creek like a petty dictator, and now she was leaving in silence. As the truck pulled away, someone left a paper crown on her doorstep with Queen of Slips written in marker. No one claimed credit, but everyone smiled. The court hearing sealed her fate. Linda pleaded guilty to reduced charges, misdemeanor fraud and misuse of funds to avoid jail time. She was ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and banned from holding any community leadership roles in Virginia. The judge's words were sharp. Your actions undermined the trust of your neighbors and abused the authority you were given. Linda stood, head bowed, her usual bravado gone. I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't need to be. Susan sent me the verdict, and I read it on my patio, sipping coffee, the plaque glinting nearby. Justice wasn't just served, it was etched into the ground. The movie night we'd planned became a celebration of Willow Creek's rebirth. Neighbors filled my patio, this time with signed releases and a unanimous vote of approval. We watched a classic comedy under the stars, kids dancing to the credits, adults laughing over shared stories of Linda's reign. My Amazon delivery guy, dropping off a package the next day, asked for a selfie by the plaque. "You're a legend," he said. I shrugged. I didn't feel like a legend, just a guy who'd had enough. Months later, The neighborhood was unrecognizable. The HOA ran like a well-oiled machine, with open meetings and clear rules. Neighbors who'd once avoided each other now hosted barbecues and book clubs. Sarah's podcast grew, and she invited me back for a follow-up episode, Rebuilding After the Wreck. We talked about community, accountability, and the power of standing up. Listeners flooded the comments, some praising my restraint, others debating the ethics of my gel stunt. One wrote, "This story shows you can fight bullies without throwing punches, just a little creativity." Another countered, "Vigilante justice sets a dangerous precedent. What if someone had been hurt?" The debate kept the story alive, and I was fine with that. It meant people were thinking. As for me, I settled back into my quiet life, my patio once again a place of peace. The plaque remained, a subtle reminder that boundaries matter, literal and figurative. I kept my evidence folder, just in case Linda or someone like her ever resurfaced. But something told me Willow Creek was done with tyrants. We'd learned our lesson, and we'd learned it together. This story isn't just about a slippery patio or a toppled wedding cake. It's about standing your ground when someone tries to walk over you, about using wit and evidence to fight injustice, and about the power of a community that refuses to stay silent. Linda's downfall wasn't just my victory, it was Willow Creek's. I hope this tale sparks a conversation among you, our readers. Have you faced a bully like Linda? Did you fight back with words, actions, or something else? Where do you draw the line between justice and revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your stories, your stands, and your take on the ethics of fighting back. Let's keep this discussion alive and make sure no one else has to slip into clarity the hard way.